Hi, everybody. Welcome to another installment of 6 feet apart. Today, we're going to be talking about very important issue and hot topic lately: police. A lot of people want to defund them. Some people want to increase them. Some people say we got enough. We just need to train them more. So, we're going to talk with retired officer Don Gaut. How long were you a police officer for?
I joined the department in 1981.
1981?
Yes.
Oh boy.
I retired in April of 2005.
Okay, so yeah, you were there for quite a while. You know what you're talking about.
A little bit.
A little bit. A little bit.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all, right now, before we get too busy, why don't y'all share it with your friends so they can see it too. Because, we're going to figure out how to eliminate crime today. So, I guess maybe we should start off with what was your experience in the police force?
Great, thank you. Well, of course, you go to the police academy, and that's where the science of policing is taught.
And how long is that training?
It's 12 could be 12 to 16 weeks of training. And
12, 16?
yes, sir. Assigned to the patrol division, you are under the tutorship of what's called field training officer for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And there you refine the training that was given to you at the police academy, and thus preparing you to be solo officers to ride on. I spent 3 years in investigations, property crimes, and also in major investigation of crimes against people. Spent 3 years as a police K-9 officer back in the early 80s. Spent about 4 years working special investigations of narcotics. We had several units. One was directed patrol. I worked there where we would focus on a specific crime initiative. And then also early on in the 80s, we had a unit called the Power Shift. We were actually the fourth shift of the 3 common shifts, graveyard, midnight, graveyard day shift, and evening shift. We came in and we worked the fourth shift, which was a 10-hour shift. And all of that was to try to mitigate those things that occurred between shift changing and afterwards, late into the evenings. Mm-hmm. So, my service to the community in Shreveport, I enjoyed it, as I said, from 1981 all the way to April 2005. Part of that tenure, I was also United States Army Reservist.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
So, let's see here. You've been in just about every department. Did they teach you conflict resolution, things
Yes.
like that?
Yeah, that is a big part of the Police Basic Academy, and not only that, it's reinforced annually through what's called Department Retraining.
Mm-hmm.
And there, in conflict resolution, you engage in interactions with each other, simulating scenarios that could certainly occur on the street. And while in that training, one is also instructed in the use of force and how to recognize use of force as it escalates through a police citizen encounter. So yes, that's an important aspect of police is de-escalation.
Right.
De-escalation.
Yeah, when I taken it conflict resolution myself, but from the other side as a protester, de-escalating situations police and counter protesters. Let me ask you something about the de-escalation. I mean, you've got the training, you redo it every year. How do we still have so many instances of aggression on unarmed people?
That's a great question. I can tell you, sir, that as an instructor at the police academy, I was there for about 4 years, I believe, from 1988 to 1992, I believe. But that you can get the training, but an individual having to have received that training, and if he or she does not in some way internalize that training and the purpose of it, when the time comes for police encounter that has become violent, that also is going to obviously resort back to what the default setting is and their personality and their experiences. And that can easily turn out to be bad for the citizen and the officer. Because police encounters, when they get violent, for whatever reason, just don't look good. Particularly now that so much video is available, we have to be, policemen and citizens have to be less fearful of each other, I believe.
Right. I agree. That's pretty interesting. So I know there are a lot of studies on collecting revenue as a police force and increasing arrests, especially with people of color. The police forces shifting away from collecting revenue as a source of income have better communities, fewer arrests, seem to interact with people better rather than, making everybody pay up for jaywalking. Is there any shift with that here, or is that pretty much the way it's always been in Shreveport?
In my experience, I was never specifically, as an officer, told to meet a quota for revenue purposes. Is that what you're referencing?
Yes, we've all heard stories about you've got ticket quotas and revenue quotas and pushing for more arrests, even if it isn't specifically tied to a dollar amount.
Yes, sir. Well, the police officer I work with, and I include myself in that category, is one who were aggressive but not abusive. Meaning that if I saw a violation, traffic, criminal, I responded appropriately. Sometimes they ended in an arrest, which will ultimately result into some type of fine. Or if it's a citation, if it's a traffic violation, sometimes officer has a lot of discretion. And if there's a citation issue, then certainly at some point during that process, it's going to be a fine, a monetary fine. Mm-hmm. So if you're out there policing and conducting yourself in a manner where you are engaging with people, there are going to be times when you issue citations and summons that will ultimately go through the court system, but that I was never told that I had to do that. Yeah. When I go in, when an officer goes into a community, he or she goes in there with an idea of helping that community and engaging in interactions with people, and sometimes results into violations and criminal acts. Right. Yeah. But never did I, as a supervisor, instruct the officer to engage, be proactive, because you had to get me a quota. Right. That's just not something that's appropriate.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I don't think it is either. Speaking about community, Were you part of, or did you get to stay in one community for a very long time to get to know the people in that community, or did they switch you from Allendale to Broadmoor to, were you all over the place?
Yeah. Well,
And not just you
no,
specifically.
I
I mean,
understand the question. Yeah, I
people
was just
in
thinking
general.
about how, that's a really good question, because, as an officer, I wanted to learn the city, and I took my same, mental attitude and approach to any community that I work in. I actually worked every district, I believe, not believe, I did work every district in Shreveport. And, but as a, executive officer, once I became a lieutenant in rank, although I wanted to keep those officers in the district they were most familiar with and they did the most work, minimum staffing became an issue because of, you had to pull people out and switch them around because of sickness and and all the other injuries and just managing those personnel levels difficult. But practically, yeah, you want to put an officer or a group of officers in an area so they can learn and they can feed off each other and learn to work well together. And that happened a lot in my career. I went down there at the police department, and either one could still hear slang, ugly slang word used around the department. And me, I was a young person, mid-20s, along with other officers, black, white, Asian. We all come in there, many of us were veterans and what have you, and we just all came, and like me, a large number of us, we weren't from Shreveport, but we made our home here. We come to love the city. So we, in turn, even though there was a culture there that was not similar to what we came in, what we brought into, we found each other. If it was in the same district or adjoining district, we found each other because we worked well with each other, we backed each other up, and over time, as we became ranking individuals, we still had that teamwork attitude about them. So that was an impact that my generation of officers came into Shreveport, and we all learned to work together, black and white. But I can tell you that I witnessed a lot of derogatory statements made by officers who were not part of that younger, shifting group of people that was coming in. And I know, agencies, departments, places, they all at some point go through those stages of development. But in police work, it's important that you work hard to dismiss any biases that you have. Because it's 50 years out now, since the civil rights movement in this country, we are dealing with and toiling with the issues that were so prevalent even 50 years ago. So we have to grow up and know that we are one and dismiss those fears that right now permeate the relationship with law enforcement and people of color. The police department belongs to the community it serves. And I think efforts now to the people are saying, we want accountability, we want effective policing, and we want the officers prepared to deliver that. I believe supervisors and those that direct policies and procedures have to align themselves with that thinking, so that we don't continue to toil in issues that should have been taken care of and resolved decades ago. And when I left in 2005, I felt that a significant change was occurring in the relationship between the officers who was coming into the department and their experiences and what they was bringing in. I just felt that it didn't always line up with the way I was brought up as a disciplined veteran, committed to the citizens to serve. And that's where I stay focused. And I met so many officers of both gender, race, and they were like-minded. But then there were some that were not, and that's where proper supervision comes in. Because once they become law enforcement officers out there working the streets, there's a lot of trust, a lot of people depending on you. But if you're not dialed in the proper way with your values in place, it can go bad.
Yeah. So accountability, let's say you're still an officer and I'm your supervisor and I notice that you're only arresting white people. Or vice versa, I'm a police officer and you're my supervisor and you notice I'm only arresting black people, which is usually the case. You know, if we both smoked marijuana, you'd be 10 times more likely to be arrested than I would, statistically. But who checks that?
I'm pausing because I'm trying to associate that question with who I was as an officer,
Mhm.
as opposed to compared to who I was as a supervisor.
No.
Now, as an officer, working in predominantly neighborhoods who are of color,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a high crime area. Things are happening, things are dynamic, things are moving. I'm probably going to encounter more people of color.
Yeah.
And logically, we're going to arrest more people of color.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the shift, my supervisor, he or she, they're reviewing my reports for the accuracy in my work and the reporting of my work, but they're not necessarily looking at race.
Mm-hmm.
So as a supervisor, once I became a sergeant, and again, I'm trying to relate how I felt about that, I think I was subconsciously aware of it when it involves certain officers. I think it was, but again, I don't remember any specific bias that I had against it. I'm just saying that maybe the officer, if he was white and working a neighborhood that was predominantly a neighborhood of color, I'm still feeling, I'm concerned with the quality of his work, not necessarily the number of black people that he's arresting, because if the quality of work is appropriate and it meets the standards of ethical, moral value policing, I don't have any worry. I just don't equate that with a color thing.
Right.
And I can tell you, Mr. Turner, that I believe that most, if not if not all, certainly not all, but most supervisors who I worked with and had experiences with, they didn't really focus on that either. We wanted to make sure that the quality of work was what it should be. Yeah.
I have a viewer question. Jen writes in and says, I admire police officers. My deal is when there's a bad policeman or policewoman, the good officers need to be able to call them out without getting punished for it and get rid of the good old boy syndrome. So she feels Shreveport and the sheriff's department are doing a good job. They're good and bad on all sides, but her opinion is we need to start calling out the bad. It will improve things. What are your thoughts on that? Is there a system set up where you could say, or is that blue sort of thing where the brotherhood of the blue prevents you guys from calling out somebody that's maybe getting too violent or not following that's ethical protocols?
You're right. Supervision is important because when things go wrong, if there's and you said her name is Jen.
Yeah, Jen.
Thank Jen for the question. No, there is nothing there that prevents an officer from calling wrong out. There's this that blue line thing is not real. When an officer is involved in a departmental infraction, the department's going to take it serious. Okay, they're going to investigate it. First, it actually has to be reported, certainly, and sometimes they are reported by police officers, citizens, and others. But when that action is investigated, there's certainly as much of it should be made. To whom the infraction was committed against, and the interested people, they should be fully informed as to how it all developed. Now, of course, there's information that's protect the officer and all that, but as far as being officer who witnessed a rule infraction is obligated to report that, and that is done generally through what's called inter-office communication, and that inter-office communication will go up from the first line supervisor all the way up through the commander, and then makes its way to the assistant chief and chief.
Can it be done anonymously?
Oh yes, oh yes. I don't know personally of any complaints made anonymously in my career. If it was something that was done, we worked it out, and we addressed it head on, straight up. But it would suggest that yes, it's possible anonymous information was given about improper action by officers. Yeah, that's quite possible. But again, supervisors, they know their people. It's sometimes it is disappointing when supervisors choose not to engage and direct and manage in the way that they should. And that is certainly a disadvantage to the officer, because he or she may be really just trying to do the work that they're been asked to do, sworn to take over to do. And when things go wrong, it's been my experience that the department comes down very appropriately and very hard as for the discipline. And then that in itself is another story, because officers, they sometimes become demoralized because they see things not being fair and all that. It's a difficult job for all. That's why supervision is important.
This is great, and that brings up one other question that was typed into me earlier from Councilwoman Lavette Fuller, who and Councilwoman Fuller has some legislation.
Some legislation for
City Council calling for an outside investigation. So of Shreveport Police. Are we at that point? Do we need that? Would that help?
I think as it relates, yes. I think as it relates to police interaction with their community, which Shreveport is so diverse now, and it's a diverse community, and with the social movement that's taking place now, as long as that fear is there between and that mistrust between the police and the citizen it serves is there, why not? I think that's an appropriate thing at this time, and I think the chief even said here today, maybe yesterday, but he said that he welcomes an investigation.
Maybe that should be just a normal thing. Any business has independent consultants come in all the time and evaluate their accounting and evaluate their practices, and maybe that should be a nationwide standard.
Maybe if the language were more like what you just framed it, independent consultant, the people would be so afraid of it. I'm not suggesting that the officers within the department, I'm not suggesting they're afraid of a federal investigation.
Right.
But if I was there serving now and I understood the events in our city and also the historical events that has occurred in this region, the city, and if I had someone in leadership to say, well, we are going to bring in an independent consultant.
It sounds a lot nicer than federal investigation.
I wouldn't have a problem. I believe that right-minded people certainly can understand where Ms. Fuller is coming from. And I think she's coming from a position of caring and moving forward with a community and a police department, which in fact serves this community. I think that's, and we'll get that one.
Yeah, oh, I definitely agree with you.
Don, we have one question from somebody who's here in the room, Mark Pomeroy.
I'm a viewer. Just because of reading recently, I was curious about your opinions about stop and frisk. It kind of started off with the work of the criminologist Keller, and then went through the work of Sherman, and it was more or less they realized that crime, half the crime occurs in like 4% of the city. And so that eventually evolved into stop and frisk. Well, if you stop and frisk someone, you're going to find them committing some sort of crime a lot of these times, and it may not be that big a deal. But those people from then on kind of have their legs cut off in terms of school and profession and that sort of thing. And so stop and frisk was not, it was an evolution down the wrong path, perhaps. What are your opinions about kind of merging stop and frisk into community policing and what's been going on here? And just what are your thoughts and ideas?
There's a lot to unwrap about stop and frisk, yeah. And as I listened to you, I was relating back in the late 80s and 90s when crack hit Shreveport. And there was 2 units I was assigned to. One was the Director Patrol, and one was called the Power Shift. And it was given to the concept was paid for through somewhat by the federal government through the administration, the Clinton administration, that gave money for community-oriented policing. We actually engaged in stop and frisk when we would read the crime reports of specific areas. We would develop a action to address that specific area, and then we would go out and engage the people in an effort to reduce those incidents of criminal activity. It always meant that the officers who were doing it, and this is just a regular patrol function, it's just that we focus in one area, a group of officers. When we decided to engage in a stop and frisk situation encounter, you always expected the citizen to be somewhat uncooperative. And if in fact they are, how would you deal with that? Because sometimes the interview would go fine, and the stop and frisk, if the officer felt like this is a situation where he or she should frisk the person as a cursory thing, not go and stretch them out and all that, just to make sure the person's not armed, and have that conversation, and it's determined that this is not a person that's in the act of, or about to commit a crime with, but certainly engage that person in a way where an introduction takes place, a conversation takes place, and then they each go about their own separate ways. But when that stop and frisk takes place between a white officer and a person of color citizen, and that person of color is already agitated and has some fear of that officer, then that officer, white, black, I'm just using white officer this time right now, has to understand that even though he knows why he's stopping this person, and this person may or may not be a bad person, but the officer has to understand that when I engage this person, I have to do it in a manner in which I put him at ease or her at ease, and I can go on and conduct that interview. It's still going to be considered stop and frisk. Now, all of those field encounters like that do not always result into a frisk. I mean, you can ascertain what the information that you're seeking by where this person stopped, time of the day this person stopped. The body language of the person is just a number factor that goes into before certain things are that officer key in on. So if there's nothing there, and this is, I think, where most people come in with the question, why did it go bad? Everything started out good, but why did it go bad? Well, at some point, somebody pushed too hard. Either the officer pushed too hard or the citizen pushed back too hard. Me, if I don't have it to where I can articulate a crime has been committed or about to be committed, I'm taking inventory of all that's going on. I'm trying, if I haven't already got this person's name, I'm making observation of his or her physical features, clothing, and all that. And I'm gonna disengage. Because why create a problem when your presence is already seen and, I'm talking about the officers, it's already seen and understood in that area. And and I'm speaking to that specifically because that is what we did. One incident I'll never forget. The officer, he was doing exactly what he should have been doing. I was the sergeant. Made the stop and frisk. The person that he stopped and talked to didn't want to cooperate. Initially, it was just an interaction where you walk up and you introduce yourself to the officer. I'm here, and just whatever the conversation whatever the point the conversation may start begin at. But somewhere it went bad. They got into a wrestling match, fussing, cussing each other, what have you. Well, I take it back. It wasn't a physical encounter, just the language that was being used. So the citizen made a complaint, and rightfully should have. The lieutenant gave me the complaint and asked me to look into it, and I did. And I determined that at a certain point there, the officer should have just backed out of the situation and not caused it to escalate. Now, both you and the citizen, y'all was talking, screaming at each other, nobody's listening. This is not a conversation here. You need to apologize to that citizen. That officer said, why do I have to apologize? And that's one thing that policemen, when I came on the A's, you didn't say thank you, and you didn't apologize. But that's not my nature as a human being. And it certainly didn't become my nature as a police officer and officer supervisor. So when I saw the wrong there, and the fact that the officer had pushed too hard, although he protested, he did in fact, and we had the family, as we all sit here, apologize to that citizen. Because when cooler heads start to prevail, it was obvious. I mean, come on, man, we policemen, we're in a position of authority. We don't have to prove anything. But man, what would it do for the mind of a person who think they've been injured is to have you to offer them an apology? I mean, so anyway, that's just one incident, and it worked. I thought it would. But I also remember that because I said, man, I bet this happens a lot. People standing on the ground and just, I'm not, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Common courtesy goes a long way.
It does. It does.
It really does. Both ways. It's another good point for community policing too, where you're in one neighborhood, you get to know all the citizens.
It is indeed. Yeah.
Of course, walking the beat might be kind of tough in the summertime in Louisiana, but
Yeah, well, I did it on bicycles.
Oh yeah, bicycle, that'd be fun.
When we would go into a community on bikes, we would have mounted patrol, we would have guys in civilian attire, whatever it would take to address the issue. And it didn't matter if it was winter or summer, or whatever it took to. Community policing is certainly important. Back in the 80s, a lot of officers who I worked with from across the city, they were from Shreveport, so they knew the city, they knew the players and all that. And when major issues, major crime came up, those officers went back to people whom they knew and were able to work through those issues and resolve those issues through arrest and passing on information. But now, I don't think we have that. The officers are from various places outside of Shreveport.
All right. So let me ask you, you were talking about the crack problem in the 80s. One of my main issues is ending the prohibition on marijuana. It's medicine. People use it recreationally. It's never killed anybody ever, and getting arrested for it ruins all people's lives. Just the kid with a joint, there goes his scholarship, his tops, and all downhill from there. How much time do police spend on fighting drugs when it could be either, say, legalize marijuana where you don't even have to worry about it, or a heroin addict, a cocaine addict, instead of throwing them in the lockup where you can still get it, having them go to a treatment facility.
Yeah, I can tell you that as a police officer working field of the street, I had a mindset to arrest those who committed offenses, whether it be drugs or other crimes. But as a supervisor, I saw how strenuous this was on time management. I mean, if you took a person into custody for drugs, Schedule 1, Schedule 2 drugs, didn't matter. That was a ton of paperwork. And of course, you're with this person, booking this person into jail. And after the booking procedure, you take the evidence and you go and take it and deposit it into the crime lab to be analyzed. You probably lost that officer off the street for about 4 hours.
Wow.
Okay.
Half their shift.
No, see, this is all going on during the shift.
Yeah.
So if that officer let's say if you're down to minimum staffing, and that officer make a drug arrest on something that maybe should look at as a mental problem, maybe instead of a criminal issue, that supervisor said, well, now instead of having 4 officers in this big district, now I have 3 officers making call for services. So if you're doing all that, and those 3 officers that's all you have to work with, who's doing the proactive stuff?
Right.
No one, because they just trying to catch up with calls for services.
Mm-hmm.
It's a demand. That's a heavy demand on policing, as far as drug arrests and trying for our legislators and leaders to try to discern where do we draw the line? Do we treat it all as a criminal act, or do we look at it as a call for help for mental illness? Maybe I don't know. That's a deeper question than a deeper subject than I've given thought to.
And well, I don't know. Thinking about it, I wonder what 911 calls that police have to answer could be conducted by a social worker or a counselor, maybe nonviolent domestic disputes, things like that.
Well, I think they try to the call takers.
Or are there calls that police have to go on that could be handled by other people besides drug calls? Like
Possibly, I don't know if calls coming into 911, if the call taker has that level of comfort in making a decision like that. So I think it's just easier. It may not be always appropriate to send police, but I think it's safer in the way that they're managed, their responsibility.
Right.
Is to just send the police officer. But yeah, once we get there, oftentimes we see, I know why I was sent here, but I don't see how much I can help.
Right.
That's. I think you're onto something there. Maybe.
So maybe, say, nonviolent domestic disturbance, you get a call for. Maybe you have a social worker that you can pick up and take with you, and you see that they can handle it and
just trying to
free you up for violent
I
criminals.
Think, maybe not in fast-moving dynamics of any particular day. Maybe that wouldn't be a practical thing. Maybe I don't know, because then where would you actually are the social workers, are they volunteers, or are they employed, or how do you set that up?
Mm-hmm.
But I think with the change that's occurring in the city, in the country, rather, and the funding that's will be necessary. And actually, you got me thinking about something else here. With the COVID-19 virus and all that this has causing the issues within the family, the nucleus of families now, and with all of the layoffs and unemployment that's developing from it, there's going to be a lot of domestic situations. And officers are going to be thrust into all of that conflict. And I don't know how practical it would be at this point where we are to have these other involved people for help, social workers or whatever. But I do think it's a logical thing to consider.
And you're right about that. With the way the economy is going, the number one argument between families is money.
Oh Lord, yes.
And really, probably a huge percentage of police work, theft, drugs, alcoholism, just people acting out because they're poor, because they don't have any money.
Well, certainly, I agree. It's not an excuse, but I see your point. It's not an excuse for them to do. But
It's not an excuse. But if we had a universal basic income, where we had a safety net for everybody, or guaranteed jobs that paid a living wage, you'd see a lot less crime. And people in areas where everybody's employed, do you see a lot of crime?
No,
Probably not.
I think there's something to that basic income, universal basic income. I think maybe it's called.
Yeah.
I think it's something there. I've seen some criticism, but I think there's the country's changing.
Yeah.
We know, and the people are suffering. And we need leaders to figure this out.
Right.
And
Yeah, no, I agree. And people say, well, how do you pay for it? You pay for it anyway. Somebody goes into a store and, shoplifts formula and diapers and whatnot and runs out. You're paying for that, the price of that is put into the things you buy. One way or another, you're going to pay for it. People got to eat. You might as well do it the nice way and help everybody rather than paying $40,000 a year to lock them up. Actually, it's more than that. It's like 140, isn't it?
I'm not certain of the exact number, but
it's not cheap. It's not cheap. I know it's about 20 times more than they pay for a year of school for a kid.
Ryan, I know we've gone over a little too long.
Oh,
we
yeah.
Need to respect.
I could do this all night.
Fascinating. I wish you'd come back. But a final comment from Jen just says, appreciate you and Donald having this today. As old as I am, I've never seen a politician take time to talk to a police officer.
Oh.
And I so respect that you are doing this. So thank you, Don.
Thank you.
And thanks, Jen, for watching, and everybody who's been watching. If you want to wrap up, I guess we're way over time.
I don't want to wrap up. I still have more.
It's been a lot of fun. Well, then let's do it again.
Maybe we can do it again.
Yeah.
Do some research. Hey, and if y'all have more questions, or you're like me and an hour from now you're like, oh, I should have said that, go ahead and put it in the comments and we'll write it down. And when we do this again in a month or two, we'll address those. So thanks for everybody for showing up and for sharing. And this is 6 Feet Apart. My name is Ryan Trundle. I'm running for Congress. You're on my Facebook page. You can also see my website, ryantrundle.com. I changed it up a little bit. It's nicer. I think it's nicer. You think it's nicer?
A lot cooler.
Yeah, it looks a lot better. So go check it out. There's little green buttons and blue buttons, and have fun with that. And there's a place to sign up for newsletters and whatnot and volunteer. And if there's somebody you'd like to see on this 6 Feet Apart, let us know that too. But thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.